Building on the success of previous sessions, our deep dive today is the roadmap to net zero for commercial property, and we'll have a particular focus on office and retail. So attendees, get ready for efficiency strategies, monitoring, optimization, maintenance, the how, why, and when to upgrade and electrify, plus renewables and offsetting, all in 60 minutes. So it's going to be a busy session. And to take us through all these various options and opportunities, today's panel comprises senior leaders, wealth of experience, progressing the sustainability of the built environment. By way of introductions, please join me in welcoming Robbie Epsom, EMEA Head of Sustainability at CBRE Investment Management, Magdalena Gibney, Group Head of Sustainability at NEPI Rockcastle, Coleman, Energy Engineering and Innovation Manager at the John Lewis Partnership, and Paul Walsh, Chief Operating Officer at CIM. It's all live, as you will see, and recorded. So audience, please, if you do have questions for our panel, pop them in the box, probably at the bottom of your screen, Q&A. Keep typing those queries in throughout our session. We'll try and get around to some of them in the final Q&A, plus we'll pick up any key points offline after the event. Once the webinar concludes, kindly take a moment to complete the very short feedback survey. It's super helpful for the organisers to understand your experience, and keep an eye out, of course, for the link to the recording that will arrive in your email inbox. Right, that's enough from me. Let the show begin. So to kick us off, I'm going to ask Paul, please, if you could provide us with just a brief overview of the strategies that make up a net zero roadmap, all of which, of course, we'll be covering in more detail through the session today. Paul, you first, please.
Thank you, Jim. And I suppose to set the scene, there are, like, for commercial property owners to achieve their ambitious CO2 or net zero goals, there's a myriad of strategies that they could execute on. And I suppose to keep today's session as focused and for people to get as much value from them as possible, I'd like to cover some strategies that we've seen our clients get the most valuable from, and we can maybe use them as references. And specifically, the key topics or the pillars of the discussion today would be around ensuring a monitoring strategy is kind of the first pillar that they would execute on, and then having an optimization strategy on the back of that, and then talk about using those two pillars, if you like, to identify opportunities for equipment that needs to be upgraded or maybe degasified. And then the last one would be to figure out how we could procure renewable energy sources, and then maybe offsets, just as a kind of a journey towards that net zero. So that would be the frame, if you like, for what we'd like to get included in the discussions today, Jim.
Excellent, thank you. So there are key pillars of our theme today. So let's get straight down to it. Question one, panel. So we're going to first look at some of those strategies to improve efficiency. So Robbie, I'm coming to you first. Could you give us some insight into the commercial incentive for sustainable portfolios? In other words, why has CBRE Investment Management identified net zero delivery as a route to enhanced ROI, return on investment? Why does it help you get better bang for your buck, Robbie?
Yeah, it's a really exciting time to actually talk about that, because we're seeing a huge change in the market, particularly in Europe at the moment, driven by regulators, investor pressures, but also by the valuation community. I think now as well, we're really starting to see a change in the way sustainability is considered in the commercial property market, and more widely the real asset space. So I think up until now, we were doing sustainability in a lot of cases because it was the right thing to do, and that's evolved over many decades. But we're now shifting into a position where sustainability is actually now a core part of the business. It's becoming a fundamental part of the value of a building and any other asset across other sectors of the economy. We're seeing organizations like RICS in Europe driving ESG KPIs, which are starting to be part of the valuation community. And that's a really good thing, because it's giving them guidance on how you can consider ESG improvements when it comes to value, both of the sort of capital value of the building, but also the rental value. But then also in Europe, and I think we're starting to see this evolve more widely around the world, we're seeing the financial regulators introduce frameworks like the EU taxonomy, the SFDR regulation, the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, which are coming with very clear KPIs, which again, when you've got something that you can communicate in a transactional way, in a consistent way, you can start to assign value to it. And that's what's really driving it. And net zero is probably the leading one in that market because the KPIs have shifted into things that are absolute. And, you know, it's things like energy intensity. Is a building highly efficient? Has it electrified? There's some very simple things which we can now get to in terms of value creation. And that's really driving this. But the pressure comes from everywhere. It's an opportunity. Most importantly, it's the right thing to do. But regulators, investors, auditors, you name it, it's pushing this forwards now.
Very nice perspective to start with, as you say, valuations and value creation, sustainability, ESG, net zero. They have currency in every sense of the word, you know, literally with the financial regulators. And as I always say, instead of, I think it's changed now, instead of what's the business case for sustainability, you could ask, and what's the business case for unsustainability, you know, which is an awful lot harder to make. So Magdalena, coming to you then in this opening session. So NEPI Rockcastle, premier owner and operator of shopping centres across Central and Eastern Europe. So when it comes to improving sustainability performance across that vast retail portfolio, that scale, I'm asking you, what's your immediate focus areas for the year ahead? What's 2024 about for you, Magdalena?
Jim, thank you for the question. I think it's very, very relevant question in terms of many aspects, coming from regulatory aspects, as Robbie mentioned, and also as Robbie mentioned, the finance aspect. We not only the year ahead, but also I have to mention that we have started this journey a few years ago already. And nowadays we cannot afford not to continue, not only because of the regulatory aspect of it, but also because we can see exactly how the world is changing. You know, we had a record high heat waves in 2023, and also we are expecting the same or even higher in 2024. So I think, you know, taking into consideration regulations is one, but also for the things that we have to do is something else. So in case of NEPI, we have set ambitious targets that are currently validated by science-based targets. It was very important for us to have the targets backed up by scientific evidence. So the targets that we have revised in 2023 are being now validated by Science-Based Target Initiative. And they are covering also all three scopes, and our commitment is related to a reduction of 80% of scope 1 and 2 emissions. So emissions reductions that are based in our common areas of our shopping centers. And we have set to reduce it until 2030 from 2019. Second one is related to our scope 3, which means that we are taking on a journey to our tenants. And we are reducing 25% until 2030 from 2022. And also our target is related to energy intensity. And we are reducing 30% again from scope 1 and 2, meaning from our common and serviced areas, until 2030 from 2022. So the focus is related to environmental targets, not mainly, but this is very, very much impacting also how we are all working together. And by all, I mean the teams on site, also our teams in headquarters, and also how the funds are being allocated to achieve those targets. So this is our major focus this year.
Excellent, thank you. And some serious targets there. And as you say, sadly, there's a lot of bad news making headlines in terms of extreme weather very, very frequently. And it is important that the climate science there is related to what you're actually doing in the built environment. And so science-based targets are a critical part of joining that all together and giving it that third-party robustness and credibility, which I think is something we'll come back to, no doubt. So regulated finance, scope 1, 2, and 3 already mentioned. So Neil, coming to you then. So as Energy Engineering Innovation Manager, obviously you identify and deliver on energy efficiency across a diverse John Lewis Partnership portfolio. So I wonder if you just very briefly give us some highlights, if you like. Can you point out some of the projects that have been particularly successful in accelerating that progress to net zero? So Neil, give us a flavour of what works, please.
Yeah, hi, thanks. So I think there's been a big drive in energy efficiency across the retail sector for a number of years. I think just driving from that optimisation efficiency point of view. We've invested heavily in the last probably 5 years, particularly in retrofit energy efficiency. So most of our buildings that we've got are going to be here for the foreseeable future. We haven't been opening a lot of new buildings, so that real focus on existing. A big one for us around energy reduction is LED lighting. We've also got some a big infrastructure around controls, so we can remotely control all our heating and lighting and other HVAC across 500 UK locations. So that brings with it a lot of optimization opportunity. We've invested heavily in HVAC, so air handling unit upgrades, fans, particular controls. The controls, as you guys know, is just a constant optimization. It's never sort of goes away. It's always keeping on top of it. And that also links into sort of more training for maintenance, training for site operatives, and just making sure that everything's working as it should. One of the challenges around buildings becoming more complex is that trying to keep them working as they were intended. And we could all go into, you know, buildings and see things that have maybe drifted over time. Lighting controls is a big one. I think the way that buildings have changed usage over the last few years, you know, the usage has been up and down. Having the ability to control lighting to when and where you need it has been a big benefit. We've also invested significantly in decarbonisation more recently around heat pumps. So we've got 40, at the end of this year, we'll have around 40 Waitroses running on heat pumps. So we've decarbonised that heating. That also leads into other opportunities where we've developed a product working with a CFD provider. We've developed a product called Air Door, which reduces air infiltration. So that helps with heating in the winter and cooling in the summer. So that's made a bit of an impact. That also has a benefit of reducing the size of equipment as well. So that's been beneficial. But I think that the main driver, really, particularly in the last year, is obviously we've got SBTi targets, we've got energy reduction targets, but also cost. You know, cost has become a big driver, particularly for a large multi-site organisation. So I think that there's a lot of things we can do, but there's still a lot around the optimization. So if you look at our energy reduction strategy, it's sort of split into two, really. You've got the large scale capex investments. We've spent nearly 30 million over the last 5 years on retrofit energy efficiency, but then there's also the constant optimization, the constant looking at where we can tweak things. Why is the boiler coming on 2 hours early? Do we need it to be this temperature? You know, when does the equipment come on? And I think, you know, 20 years ago, buildings were set up completely different to what they are now. You'd have them say, we have the heating on from 6 in the morning till 10 at night. And then you sort of start asking the question, do you need that on? Where's the opportunity? Why have you got some heating on this area? This is in cooling. It's going to be a warm day. Why have the boilers come on? So just really looking at that sort of optimization and having the data behind the optimization as well. So that's relevant for both the capex projects. So if we deliver a capex project, we can demonstrate it's actually delivered the savings that was intended. And also from an optimization perspective, how we can constantly keep on top of things. And particularly where you've got large portfolios, having the data to be able to make the most of your time, I think is really useful, because otherwise you can quite quickly sort of disappear into data without getting much insight from it. So being able to have an oversight of a lot of systems without a lot of integration, without a lot of investigation is really beneficial. So I think, yeah, in terms of the overall, there's a lot around net zero, around decarbonisation, but I think we just need to keep the energy efficiency in mind as well, because there's going to be a lot more focus on energy efficiency metrics within net zero as well. So I think that there's a huge opportunity still, and sometimes it's not the sort of big, you know, the big exciting stuff. It is the, can you turn your lights off? Is this running? Is your boiler working? That type of thing. So yeah, there's still a lot of opportunity out there as I see it.
Excellent. Some very nice insights there. As you say, the usual sort of retrofit, LED lights, controls, optimization, also HVAC, you know, and we're talking cooling as well as heating. As mentioned, for heat pumps and air door. And as you say, it's evolving. User experience is evolving. Buildings are changing over time. The climate's changing. It's all moving. It's never constant. And the data helps you manage in those circumstances. And of course, you need the analytics to understand what the data is actually telling you and to turn it into intelligence. So nice points there. So keeping, if you like, on that theme very much now, Paul, I'm coming to you. We're now going to look at that monitoring and optimization pillar that you highlighted at the top. So why is continuous monitoring of plant and equipment so foundational to a successful net zero strategy? Paul.
Well, I suppose maybe to start with a bit of good news, Jim. Every large complex building that we see, there is plenty of data flowing within that building already through the BMS, and I suppose good technology unlocks that data set and allows it to be mined from an optimization perspective. And I suppose Neil hit the nail on the head there that, you know, a lot of buildings have very complex data sets that are varying in age and varying in complexity. So being able to use that data set to identify ways in which you can optimize your existing plant and equipment without having to deploy meters or without having to spend CapEx is often a very useful lever for the building owners to pull. And I suppose the reason why the monitoring of existing plant equipment is so useful or so beneficial is, I suppose, it firstly, it establishes baseline. So it lets you know how well your plant equipment is or is not running, right? So that kind of provides the baseline. The second piece is I suppose it identifies that low-hanging fruit or that continuing optimization opportunity, because things do drift, right? Weather changes, people change set points, etc. So it's that continual monitoring and optimization. And then it prevents the degradation of savings. So if you do get an upgrade to a particular piece of plant and equipment, a good analytics platform will use existing data sets to flag when things are beginning to deviate. So you don't get that seesaw of, you know, savings that certainly from an optimization perspective, nobody likes. And the last piece, I kind of just to touch on a point that Robbie made around that sustainable financing piece, which is key. Like, you've got to be able to show that the investment you're making in your building is driving that operational improvement year on year. And every company is very, very nervous now of being accused of greenwashing, right? So having, you know, a sound data set that you can show incremental year on year improvement, and that is linked back to the providers of a green loan, they're going to begin to demand to see that, you know, operational efficiency year on year being driven. And it aligns then with any of the building regulations that, you know, the certifications that people are trying to achieve around LEED, neighbours, the Green Building Council certificates, etc. So I suppose the monitoring and the optimization of existing plant equipment, Jim, is something that we deem to be, you know, should be the very first cab off the rank in terms of a net zero journey, and it's always the starting point for where we've seen the biggest bang for our buck from the clients that have worked with us.
Thanks, Paul. And of course, that would be the first EV cab off the rank, of course, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah,
You know,
sorry.
so you know, so yeah, nice point about baselines. Of course, low hanging fruit, but and also about degradation of savings. And good to hear you mention, of course, the challenges around greenwash and transparency and evidencing that kind of progress and that kind of achievement. And as 2030 zooms up on everybody, it's going to get even more crucial as those years tick down. So following up on that then, Neil, if I come back to you now. So, you know, ensuring equipment's highly optimized and tuned is critical for efficiency operationally, obviously. So John Lewis, however, how do you balance the need for that energy optimization on the one hand with, of course, maintaining superior customer experience and making sure they enjoy your stores? So how do you do both, Neil, please?
So I think it's a challenge, to be honest, trying to keep that balance. I think as a large organisation, we will always need to be using a certain amount of energy. You know, in the summer we like to keep things cool, and in the winter we like to keep things warm. But I think as long as we can do that in the most efficient way. In terms of the optimization, we're quite lucky because being a supermarket within Waitrose, we've got a lot of infrastructure around refrigeration monitoring, which is obviously critical as a business requirement. And a lot of our infrastructure sits on the back of the refrigeration monitoring, so that we can control lights, we can control heating, ventilation. In terms of optimization methods, we're looking at standardization of set points. We can remotely control heating, lighting, and cooling. That gives us the ability to react to if it's a particularly cold or particularly warm day. We can globally change set points. But we do push the boundaries a little bit, I suppose, as well, particularly in the shoulder months when it's not too cold or not too hot. We can start to widen the dead bands, for example. So before mechanical cooling kicks in, we use maximized fresh air where possible. So we use free cooling our refrigeration through the winter. So there's lots of things we can do to try and reduce the use of heating and cooling plants. So another example is in the summer, we do night purging. So we flush the building through with cool air at night to save on the mechanical cooling. So there is quite a lot of things that we can do with what we do have, but it is a constant challenge. And I think that ability, as Paul said, just to try and keep an eye on things, making sure that they haven't drifted, making sure nobody's overridden stuff. Because as you guys are probably fully aware, when you've got potentially thousands of people having an impact on your systems, whether it's BMS or controls or thermostats, things can get out of kilter. So I think having that optimization to be able to see if things have deviated, so that you can get back on them, so it's either through maintenance or through staff, to make sure that things are operating as they should do. But I suppose on the point around FM, I think the FM guys do have a challenge. You know, budgets have been cut year on year for a long time across the sector. So you know, having the data is just as much benefit from an FM perspective as it is from an energy perspective. So if they go to a large building, they know where the problem is. So instead of it being, oh, I'm hot, I'm cold, they can say AHU4 cooling valve has got a problem, and they can go straight to that problem. And that not only makes the fix quicker, it makes those guys more efficient, and we get a quicker resolution. So there's a lot more to the data than just the energy. It also drives that overall FM performance and the opportunities within that.
Excellent.
But yeah, it is definitely an ongoing challenge.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, and you've highlighted some of it there. You know, you talked about standardization controls, but FM's a challenge. And nice point about pushing the boundaries, things like night purging, ways of working those margins to try and satisfy both the agendas or align them as well as you possibly can. So some nice real world points there about how you actually, and of course, managing the humans. It's not just the systems, and but also the people working them and the staff, and which includes training and all those other scenarios. So
yeah, I think it's. Sorry, I was just going to say, just on the point, yeah, that there is an element of removing control away from non-core engineering people as well. I think that's probably something we've learned from, particularly where you've got complicated buildings. It's easier just to not let everyone have a view on temperature, for example, because there's usually reasons why things aren't necessarily working, and the controls guys usually get the blame when it usually isn't the controls. It's usually plant and equipment. But yeah, just to make that point on that, not having the restrictions around who can and can't make any changes is definitely key.
Excellent. And and probably then if I come to you, so we're talking, you know, about robust data sets, essential starting point for improved sustainability performance. Now, I'd like to ask you then, what do you say are the most critical data points and insights that commercial building owners, operators should focus on for net zero? What would you flag as the most important data points, please?
Yeah, it's a really important question. I think it's almost surprising because, you know, really it's non-financial data tends to be, in most cases, the most important data, because it's the real world things that you know, that are flowing through a system, mass, energy, etc. I'm a chemical process engineer by training, and you know, if you look to other sectors, you'd never have other sectors operating the way the built environment has for the last you know, 10, 20, 100 years plus. You know, pharmaceutical, food processing, that everything is measured and optimized to the nth degree. You know, any waste streams become byproducts or feed back in as, you know, as kind of recycled feedstock. And to all the things that Neil's been saying and everyone else, everything is measured: temperature, pH, you know, flow rate. We know everything. Buildings, for some reason, maybe the cost of energy, the cost of water, the fact that they don't have huge health and safety risks like maybe some of these industrial processes have had historically, have meant that whilst the data is there, it hasn't been properly measured, centralized, and all the great things that Neil's talking about, you know, have not existed for many years. So it's starting to come together. We have 150 billion of assets under management. It's a virtual city if you put it all in one place. The challenge you have when you operate at our level of kind of helicopter sort of view of it is that when we don't have that comparable data across that virtual city, we are unable to make those decisions at scale, which allow us to drive the change, or as you keep hearing through things like COP28, you know, to shift towards investing those trillions. So I think the key point I want to make here on the data piece is it depends on what part you're dealing with: planning, building optimization, investment. If it's about shifting money into something, investing in a full repositioning of an asset, then there are some very specific data points. So if it's about trying to seek planning permission in a area of West London at the moment where we have power constraints, again, there are very specific data points that matter. For us as investment managers, we are selling financial products. We're not technically selling buildings. We're selling a financial product that comes with an idea. It's a fiction to some extent. And what we're saying is, in this financial product, whether it be a core plus, a value add, we are going to deliver X. And that might be that we're going to invest in brown assets and reposition them to green assets, in which case we need to make a promise around some type of KPI that we keep in our investment criteria. And so the key things that we're seeing emerging now are the absolutes, the things that we can transact on. Is a building highly efficient or isn't it? That's something we can transact on, we can promise. And that now, thankfully, thanks to things like the European Energy Performance Building Directive, which I think has just gone through its version 4 update, there are now things which we can agree on. A office asset in a Mediterranean climatic zone is X kilowatt hours per square meter. If it's better than that, it is considered highly efficient. That is a transactional KPI, and it's something that we can measure, both at the design PED, primary energy demand, but also the measured or actual at the asset. And we're seeing that those sorts of things emerge, but it's almost becoming less so things like greenhouse gas emissions, which we don't really measure at the asset. We calculate that through the energy consumption. It's the absolutes, like you see in the automotive industry, top speed, miles per gallon, torque. These are absolutes which you can compare and transact on. And that is where buildings are heading towards. What are the things which we know we're all talking? Is it electrified? Yes or no? And what do we mean by that? Does it have on-site renewables? Yes or no? And if not, do we source offsite, and are they credible? Those are the absolutes which we can transact on across the value chain. And that's what's really driving the flow of capital. You can't invest a huge amount of an asset if you don't know if you've reached a point where it's highly efficient. It's hard to justify whether you have reached that point or not.
Excellent. Strong point made there. So there is more to be measured. As you said, we can get more granular, can get more detail, and you do have to match your points with your purpose. But as you say, it's about those absolutes, transactional, and comparing apples with apples. That's what enables deals to be done. So Magdalena, so if I'm coming to you on a similar point, then NEPI Rockcastle portfolio, as you sort of had, like 9 countries, I think it covers, each with its own climate, culture, language, etc. So monitoring so many assets, what are the key factors for you in successfully implementing a strategy across so many different locations? Magdalena, could you give us some insights on that, please?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that what Neil and Robbie said is valid for our portfolio as well. The only difference is that it is our portfolio. So actually, all the assets that we have in the portfolio, we own them. So we own them and we operate them. Therefore, it's in our best interest to keep them as efficient as possible, and to accommodate also the needs of the tenants that are in these assets, as well as visitors. So we always say that we can't improve what we can't measure. So collecting the data for us has been on top of our agenda for several years now. And based on the data that we are collecting, we can monitor actually the consumption, energy consumption, waste, and water. And based on this data, we can then make some analytics and also determine the performance of each asset. We can also benchmark the assets versus each other or against each other based on the similarities of the building's features, based on the location, based on geographies. As you mentioned, our portfolio is spread across 9 different countries. So you can imagine from Lithuania down to Bulgaria or even Serbia, so we have different climates across all these countries. So for us, it's very, very important that we collect the data so we can analyze it. Also very challenging for us is the fact that we can have in one building up to 150 or more shops, tenants. So also agreeing our ambitions have to go line in line or hand in hand also with the tenants that we have in the shopping centers. So for us, this is a challenge. and of course accommodating the comfort, as Neil said, regarding the comfort of the visitors. You know, we don't have one big box. We have a box with many tenants, and then we have the common area. And in that common area, and this is where all the life goes on with the visitors that are visiting the shopping center. So for us, it's a combination and balance between all these factors in order to implement the best sustainability operations and the best sustainable initiatives in to accommodate the needs of all the stakeholders.
Excellent. So some nice insights, and yeah, the scale of it there, Lithuania to Serbia. And as you say, of course, it's not just buildings, there are multiple tenants within those as well. So, you know, it's even more complex building by building, if you like. But ultimately it comes down, an element of it comes down to manage it first. You have to measure it, you know, and then I would always say, and then you have to message it. Often there's a communication piece that goes with that, whether that's with your staff or your customers, or maybe even your stakeholders. So now we're moving into the second half of this session now. And if you thought the panel were working hard in the first half, we're going to work even harder in the second half. So things are the tempo is going to go up. So for the next 30 minutes, if you like. So we're going to kick off with upgrade and electrify. Neil, I'm coming to you first. Just some highlights. So talk us through John Lewis Partnership, strategy for selecting where to invest in CapEx, capital expenditure upgrades across your portfolio. Just give us some bullet points there, please, could you, Neil, on CapEx?
Yeah, so I suppose CapEx is obviously a big part of our strategy. I think ultimately, as a commercial organisation, we have to go for the best return on investment. That's the primary. Leading into that, we also link into our maintenance. So if we've got capital replacement programs, so for example, if a boiler fails today, that would obviously get prioritised from a net zero perspective. We don't want to be putting in equipment now that's going to cause us a long-term legacy from a carbon perspective. So yeah, the return on investment. We've also got prioritisation within our estate. So there's some buildings are more like flagship buildings, get more investment. Certain areas of the country which we want to target maybe get prioritised. But overall, we'll come back to that return on investment, and it's not just like a one-off. You know, we get heavily scrutinised on coming back to the data. Did we deliver the savings? Why or why not did we deliver? What we also do is we try and wrap projects in. So we try and do a program level. So instead of doing a one-off site, we'll do 5, 10, 15, 20 or more potentially. That then gives us an overall balanced ROI across the portfolio, which allows us to pick some stores which may not have the best payback due to, I don't know, age, location, height of ceilings, that type of thing. But if we can then absorb them into our overall program, we can get a good return on investment, but also pick up the stragglers, as it were. So I think that's definitely something to think about. Significant investment into retrofit as well. So like it's relatively straightforward, or more straightforward, shall I say, looking at net zero in new builds. Obviously existing buildings, particularly old locations, is much more of a challenge. So yeah, I think overall it's fundamentally it's looking at the financial returns. But I think more recently with regards to net zero, I think that has changed things slightly. So whereas energy efficiency investments always used to be, we're talking 2, 3, 4 year payback, with net zero, it sort of changed things slightly. So where we're looking at switching from gas boilers to heat pumps, the business case isn't anywhere near as good as it would have been for LED lighting, for example. And that's where the financing and the funding needs to look a bit more longer term, and also looking at potentially, the cost of carbon. What does that mean? And as Robbie said, around what does that do to the value of the building? Looking at beyond the quick financial returns, just cash returns, looking at the more broader opportunity, I suppose. Is it going to increase its EPC rating? Is it going to increase its asset value? What's the cost of carbon in the future? Is it going to de-risk our portfolio? So that there's more to think about when we start to look at net zero than there was when we were purely looking at energy efficiency.
Yeah, excellent. That's a nice point. So obviously ROI, but as you say, exactly how you describe and quantify those returns and over what time frame, and net zero is changing the equation slightly there, and in terms of climate risk and carbon risk, and a nice point about bundling together some of the less cost effective parts of the portfolio in with some others in order to be able to optimize your returns. So, Robbie, then if I'm coming to you, if you share some insights about CBRE point of view in approaching this electrification of the property portfolio. So electrification and sustainability, Robbie.
Yeah, I think we all probably know what we need to do to get to net zero in the commercial property, real assets sort of sector more widely. You know, we refer it to as the 4 E's plus carbon removal being the kind of last piece. And, you know, that is the sort of typical hierarchy of energy efficiency being first, electrification, energy procurement on site or credible off site if it's not feasible on site. And then lastly, that embodied carbon, whole life carbon, making sure that your value chain is doing everything that it needs to be doing to also go down that journey of efficiency, electrification, switching those fossil fuels off. Carbon removal is effectively the net in net zero. That's our investment in carbon removal, and that's to mop up those residual emissions at the end. But the big focus right now in terms of at the asset level is those first 2 E's. It's the energy efficiency and the electrification. You could argue long term, if the grid is fully decarbonized, that all that matters is electrification because, you know, like data has gone on that same journey. You know, energy efficiency might too, but in the short term at least, and that might be for even the next 10, 20 years plus, if we don't focus on the energy efficiency first, we just have a rebound in the grid where we have to keep building more renewable infrastructure to keep up, particularly as EVs and gas boilers are switched off for electric boilers. That just sticks up the kilowatt hour electric. So they're 2 very important things for us. And what we try not to do is prescribe a one size fits all, because that doesn't work. These things, both energy efficiency and electrification, are different based on asset type, country, even sometimes the tax regime that the fund might operate within, you know, for things like rooftop solar. There are all sorts of considerations that we have to look at. But I think to build on the points that Neil was making, what makes it extra complicated, and this is that value piece again, is who pays for it also changes. You know, if we have a particular occupier that sits in a load of assets for us across multiple geographies, they might have a very strong ambition to electrify to a point where it's not just the cost of it that's driving them to do that. And if we're able to collaborate with them to potentially share some of those CapEx costs to get those assets transitioned to fully electric, highly efficient buildings, then it changes the business model for all of us. And there are even cases where there are subsidies available, where there's investors sitting above us who might want to contribute to sort of hard to transition assets. So it is a complicated thing. And what we're doing is we're getting on sites at all of our assets with energy auditors, engineers, to answer the question of what, if you took away all factors, what would we need to do to get these buildings to zero emission buildings as defined by the European Commission? And then what we can do is we can take those insights and we can work out how to build that into the commercial model. When do we do it? What's the right technology? Have we already budgeted some of these through business as usual refurbs? You know, we might already be switching out the HVAC to a more efficient gas system, which means it's not necessarily a huge incremental increase to then transition that to electric, going beyond that budget, beyond that planned CapEx. But that piece is the complex piece. That's where all of our brains have to come together and work out how we make this work. But value creation is not just black and white, as it isn't for all the other factors. You have to look at the full picture. What does the occupier want? What does the investor want? What's the legislation in that country? And when you do that, you can then often make it work. The question is more time and technology rather than whether it's feasible or not.
Excellent. Nice point about choosing, and that anticipates probably what I'm going to ask Magdalena next. But efficiency, electrification, of course, if you cut consumption, you cut carbon. It is that simple. But a good point about who pays. So, Magdalena, if I'm coming to you, as we touched on earlier, NEPI Rockcastle, vast portfolio. So how do you prioritize? How do you make choices? How do you pick shopping centres to upgrade or electrify for sustainability, Magdalena?
So, you know, first of all, we have the targets that we have set for the group, for the entire group, and then based on the data that we are analyzing also the potential of each building. So practically, what we did was we set up a working group that is analyzing asset performance, asset by asset, and we are comparing also the potential of each asset, and then we make a plan of action for each asset in order to improve it. in order to improve its performance, and also contributing to achieving overall group target. So practically, we are gathering experts that we have within our teams, and also external experts, and making a plan of how we can improve certain assets in order for them to be more efficient overall. It doesn't always mean that we will electrify them, not only because we don't wish to electrify them, but sometimes we also have gas which comes from renewable sources. And also another thing is that being based in 9 different countries, there is 9 different rules. There is, the governments are completely different, and the government's agenda is completely different in each of these countries. Where in some countries like Romania, we have much easier access to renewables, versus Poland, which is very, very coal based, and this is something which is very historical as well. In our case, so again, we have to take this aspect into consideration. So that's how we are prioritizing. So we just have to take case by case, asset by asset basis, and then make sure that all the capex and that we are investing into also brings this all together. Another thing is that we have to analyze the EU taxonomy. And we have to report EU taxonomy. And EU taxonomy means that whatever sustainable OPEX, CAPEX, and turnover we introduce, it can be called sustainable. So we have to determine, first of all, eligibility, and then second of all, alignment with the taxonomy. And that's something that switches our mindset in order to improve the allocation of the money that goes into CAPEX, that goes into OPEX, and then is also related to improving the sustainable operations.
Good stuff, thank you. So, okay, nice points about taxonomy. Also, good mention for governance, and obviously getting that expertise either in-house or externally in order that you can tackle things case by case. So, Paul, and this, if I'm coming to you then, so, okay, we understand adequate maintenance of equipment, it can limit the need to upgrade excessively, but various labels thrown around for different strategies: preventive, reactive, predictive, planned, unplanned, data-driven. To be honest, it seems it can easily become a game of buzzword bingo. So in your role working with large portfolio clients, what one or key strategy have you seen to be the most effective at improving sustainability outcomes? Pick a winner.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I suppose it kind of reverts back to some of the points that that Robbie was raising around, being super selective with how you execute on a net zero strategy. Like in some instances, continuing to sweat an asset, being a piece of equipment, may be a more carbon sustainable initiative than replacing it, because there's embodied energy with ripping out an air handling unit and putting in a new one, or a chiller as an example. So I suppose ensuring that the equipment that you have in your building is operating as efficiently as possible on an ongoing basis is definitely the number one winner I would pick, Jim. And I suppose the key thing I've seen is that, like, I qualified 25 years ago as an engineer, and one of my first jobs was starting or working on a PM routine for air handling units. And at that stage, 25 years ago, you were working off a checklist, and you go up to the air handling unit every 3 months, every 6 months, every 9 months, and you check things off a list. And I suppose to my dismay, it hasn't moved on a lot, which is kind of frustrating. Instead of using data to tell you what areas of an air handling unit, an example, that need attention, a lot of it tends to still be that checkbox methodology. So I suppose the type of maintenance that is paramount to equipment running as carbon efficiently as possible is the data-driven maintenance. Like, you look at the airline industry, an airplane pulls into an airport, it's plugged in, a list of 3 or 4 things come up that need to be changed by the maintenance team, and that's done continually, and it allows that plane to be in the air for as long as possible and flying as efficiently as possible. That type of data extraction, analytics on the data, and actionable insights across that data set is really the key to any maintenance program we see working most effectively across our client base.
Excellent. Nice clarity on that, and data-driven for that kind of desirable efficiency. And so Now we're a quarter of a session left. We have two big topics we're going to pick up, and it's not exactly fingers on buzzers, but it's going to be pretty rapid fire. So it's renewables and offsetting, and I'm going to whip round the panel, and you're going to give us these real punchy points. So Magdalena, starting with you on renewables, large portfolio. So at NEPI Rockcastle, how do you approach developing and procuring renewable energy on-site versus off-site? Quick highlights for us, please, Magdalena.
Okay, so we have committed to produce on-site renewables as part of our pathway to reach net zero. And we have already commenced the installation of photovoltaic panels in 2022. In our Romanian portfolio, this is important to say, and we've deployed this in 2022, investing 3.4 million in 10 photovoltaic installations in Romania in 2022. Then in 2023, we rolled out to another 27 million for 27 million in 27 assets, and we still have a couple of assets to complete in 2024. This will give us a capacity of 38 megawatts, which equals to about 25 total energy used in the assets in the Romanian portfolio. So we see this investment as going hand in hand with first of all reaching our targets of production of renewable electricity, and then reducing our emissions by doing so, and also fulfilling the goals of renewable energy production. So we are also making a feasibility study of the opportunity to do off-site photovoltaic power plants to cover the remaining 80% via virtual power purchase agreements. But this is still under feasibility study, and we will make a decision during 2024-2025.
Great. That's a very good case study example there from Romania, actually delivering on these aspirations and ambitions. So, Neil, similarly, if I come to you, John Lewis Partnership, talk to us briefly about how renewable energy, how you're utilizing it to hit those golden net zero goals.
Yeah, I think, well, renewable energy underpins net zero, full stop, I think, for a lot of organisations in terms of being able to electrify our fleet, electrify our heating, hot water. It's all based on renewable electricity being the fundamental part of it. And I think us using renewable electricity sort of halves our carbon footprint for scope 1 and 2 pretty much straight away. So that's a huge part for that. But more recently, there has been a lot of challenge around, renewable electricity, as Robbie alluded to, around the quality and the provenance of it. And I think that's a big challenge at the moment, because, if you've got an all electric site and you go and get green tariff electricity, then you're net zero, which doesn't tie in any energy efficiency. It doesn't necessarily tie in that provenance. And I think we make up our electricity through a mixture of REGO-backed grid electricity, PPAs with specific assets, and we're also looking at more on-site generation. But I think at the moment there needs to be possibly more differentiation between those three, because if you've got your on-site generation, then that should surely be more, let's say, more valuable, but it's got more provenance. You know exactly where it's come from. You can see where it's come from. So I think that there needs to be the UK GBC are looking at a sort of rating mechanism to look at how energy is captured. But so fundamentally it underpins our net zero strategy. I think the difference between the on-site, and we're always going to need to import energy from the grid. I think that's a given, particularly in buildings. Talking about offices or supermarkets specifically, you're only ever going to be able to generate, maximum 10 or 15%, I would say, from solar on a supermarket. Offices are probably even less, particularly high-rise offices. So they're always going to need that grid energy. But if we can somehow use the benefit of power purchase agreements with specific assets, or try and increase the provenance of energy. I know there's a focus at the moment about granular, so looking at where your energy comes from during certain times of the day, which again gives you more more provenance. But I think one of the challenges around all that is going to be cost. You know, energy costs are high. Are people going to want to pay more for green energy? You know, maybe they should be. But I think that that's obviously going to be a balance to be made between operational costs for a business and also ensuring that energy is as green as it can be, really.
Yeah. Thanks, Neil. Some nice, looking under the hood a bit there in terms of course, yes, as you said, halving carbon footprint, very attractive, but not all renewable energy is created equal, if you like. There's this provenance question, and that's we're getting into some slightly more subtle and detailed kind of discussions there. So, Paul, if I come to you then, so yeah, sourcing this renewable energy, but how can technology enhance the return on investment around these renewable energy projects for commercial properties, Paul?
Yeah, and I suppose the role of technology, Jim, here is super simple, and I'll keep this super quick, right? Because technology is a key enabler for demand side reduction. So it just produces the quantity of energy a building uses. It doesn't necessarily matter where the energy comes from, right? But if the client is producing energy locally, so in other words, they've got a wind turbine or they've got PV on the roof, you've got to make sure that every electron that's created is used in the most efficient way. If you look at that cradle to grave analysis of how an electron is created versus where it's used, it would be sacrilege to create an electron and then to have it that's running on a pump overnight or on a fan that is running excessively. It's total contradiction to generating electricity renewably. So that's technology's role, making sure that every electron is used to maximum impact at a building level. And then the stuff around the PPAs, again, is separate to I suppose the discussion, but it is paramount that the source of the green electricity outside of what can be generated on site is verified. And I think that's a point that Robbie and Neil both flagged as well. But technology is all about demand side reduction.
Enabler, thank you. Yeah, use less, buy less, generate less effectively.
Exactly.
So, Robbie, quick highlights from you. I'll just mention a couple of challenges, because there are challenges involved in this with integrating renewable energy sources and how you've addressed these. Just give us a flavour of a couple of challenges, please, Robbie.
Yeah, and I think a lot of them have probably been flagged already. I completely agree. Renewables is fundamental to net zero. If you want to define something as a zero emission building in almost a regulatory sense now, that is a key part of it, with the priority being on site. But to Neil's points, that is only to a point, at which point you then need to procure off site. And there's a whole piece from the challenge perspective on how do we define that so it is credible, because people want to do the right thing. They're ready and prepared to spend on this, but they need to have the security that if they're going to then zero out effectively their scope 2 electricity related emissions, they know that it's been, it's justified. There's no double counting, etc. And there's all sorts of ways to do that. From our perspective, the biggest challenge is around scale. We've got to do this across a virtual city that transcends multiple borders. But also, more importantly for us, it's not just about the asset type. Neil talked to different types of rooftops across offices, urban, rural, etc. They all matter. Structural integrity matters. If the roof isn't ready and we have to do loads of structural work, you create a longer payback period in terms of embodied carbon, and that equally could negate the benefit of doing it on site. Rooftop versus car park canopy. Certain countries have regulations to do it on top of car parks, like France, 80 spaces and above, for example. So there's lots of things. And in the investment world, it gets even more complicated because we have certain investment vehicles in certain jurisdictions that can't have non-rental income. And so that then pulls away certain models for rooftop solar, like CapEx and us getting any income from it. So lease versus CapEx, what we've done is we've launched a project, which we've aptly named Project Helios, which is to try and understand a house view on this so we can guide the business, so we can remove those challenges centrally and effectively marry them up to the solution providers across Europe, and make sure that they can get on with this at scale. But there's a lot of challenges, not to mention supply chain issues, both quality and of provenance, but also just availability. So lots of things, but we're taking it systematically so we can roll it out.
Absolutely. Nice point there. Yeah, fundamentally comes down to scale, and we are talking mainstreaming, and you can't talk mainstreaming without talking scale and supply chain and all those bigger numbers that go with it. So we're into the last 10 minutes then. We're going to have a quick run round around offsetting, and then I'm going to come to each of you for one final question, one last takeaway, one key piece of advice. So it can just be a name or a thing. So that slight distraction playing on your minds there. So I'm going to come back for you for that real final comment, the one golden piece of advice. But just before that, offsetting, quick run round. So Robbie, I'll come back to you first then. So what are your main considerations when assessing the quality of carbon removal offsets? Quickly, I know we could do a whole session on this. And what do you think needs to be done to improve that quality? So Robbie, quality of offsets, please.
It comes down to provenance again. You know, the closer it is to your business, in our case, that might be investing in land, and and using that as a nature-based solution to carbon removal, which has both sequestration of carbon, but also biodiversity benefits, social value benefits as well. And we're already seeing things like that take off. DEFRA, the part of the UK government, recently seed funded a nature-based fund in the UK, for example. So there's really exciting stuff there, and I think that's a huge opportunity. Carbon removal investment comes down to nature or technology-based things like direct air carbon capture. Also an opportunity, in my view, for the built environment, because you could have SMEs on rooftops in urban environments, directly capturing carbon from the atmosphere and turning it into products. So there's again the right place. It's not something we should all be focusing on today in terms of doing, because we should be focusing on all the other things we discussed: efficiency, electrification, renewables. But carbon removal takes time. If you're doing the nature-based route, trees don't grow overnight. So we should all be focusing on our planning and our roadmaps and looking at the time frame for when we need to get to that point. And that's where we are, is understanding what we need to do so we can make sure we start the journey in time.
Good, nice point there. And I think, this decade we're going to see much more interest in biodiversity gain and loss, and things like rewilding, as we try to quantify some of the benefits there. So Magdalena, quick on offsetting then. So what's your stance on the role of carbon offsetting for sustainability at NEPI Rockcastle? Please, Magdalena.
We have a very similar mindset as Robbie mentioned. We are not focusing on carbon offsetting at the moment. Personally, I have a moral problem with offsetting. So, being very frank, I think that offsetting is not the way to reach net zero. Nevertheless, I am sure it's inevitable. But I will go the same as Robbie. I think that we need to focus at the moment on making sure that we are reducing emissions. We are addressing all the other aspects, like the social aspects, also the biodiversity aspect, and also using less energy in general. I think this is the focus at the moment. And in the long term, yes, we need to, once we've done all that, we can start focusing on looking at the carbon offsetting, but making sure that we are not greenwashing in whatever.
No, very valid point. And as you say, there are questions about the ethics, and good number of scandals and revelations last year about the lack of credibility, which challenged the market greatly. And so in a sense, that will up the game for some people, but it also unnerved others and investors, and there were a lot of questions raised. So then, Neil, of course, you're in a slightly different position, just briefly, because John Lewis has announced it would reduce its operational greenhouse gas emissions to net zero without purchasing offsets. So just very briefly, if you're not doing that, what are the keys to making that happen and keeping it viable and on target without offset, please, Neil?
I think putting that extra stretch in there just makes us think a little bit harder about, rather than default into offsets now, 10 years earlier, whatever, it's an opportunity to try and really push things, try and stretch those targets, try and deliver everything we possibly can. I think that's part of that challenge, is just looking at every single part of our carbon emissions and finding a solution for every single part. And then in 10 years' time, we might need, things might change a little bit, but in order to get us to where we need to get to, I think adding that statement in there has definitely added an extra challenge from us from a strategy perspective.
That's a nice point, because some of the criticism of resorting to offsets is that it can be the lazy option, in some cases. So there is a rigor to not doing that, do everything else first. So it is the last resort. So panel then, we're just about bang on time. We're about 60 minutes. So audience, I'm going to get you now 4 key things to take away with you. So I'm sure you've absorbed the other 59 minutes, but listen now for 4. I'm going to ask the panel for 1 piece of advice to share with owners and managers of commercial property as they look to accelerate. So if you had to say one thing, this is your elevator pitch, this. So I'm going to come around the panel, starting with you, Robbie, and you'll be last, Paul. So this is your one thing. If you do nothing else, what's your one piece of advice, please, Robbie?
So this is aimed at asset owners, asset managers. The global economy operates within the built environment. It is the casing for everything that we do, infrastructure and real estate. The changes we make at scale not only transcend borders in a way that politics and everything else, just can't do, but it cascades down to all those occupiers, that real economy across that. So scale, scale, scale. That is the opportunity we have, is to drive this and get those solutions at scale.
Excellent, strong start. Scale, scale, scale. Neil, this is your one big takeaway. Hit us with it, please.
I think we need to get on with it. I think we need to speed up. I think we need to take a bit more risk. I think, we're already 4 years in. And if you look at the pace of change, I think we need to accelerate the pace of change. And if that needs more risk, then it needs a bit more risk. Because when you look at, as Robbie said, the amount of investment that's out there that's ready to go, and the amount of projects that are out there that are ready to go, we just need to smash those two together and get on with it. I think that's my
excellent. So be braver, effectively. So we've got scale, we've got speed. Magdalena, what's your big takeaway, please?
My big takeaway is that we need to make sure that we do what we say we do. So we walk the talk. As a piece of advice, I would say that committing to ambitious but yet achievable targets, also based on science, is very important, and I highly recommend to address those. Collecting the data and analyzing it and making the investment plans to achieve the targets. But also very important is to have a strong mindset of sustainable operations, if this is the sphere where you are present, and also have support from the board and from the team members that you are working with, and also your external stakeholders that you are cooperating with.
Excellent. So nice points there. I'll take stakeholders out of that, I think. Bring your stakeholders with you, I think. So we've got scale, speed, stakeholders. I'm not obliging you to use a word beginning with S, Paul, but the last words from you. What's your final takeaway, please?
Look, I suppose my takeaway is that there's a perception that, carbon or net zero carbon journeys are always capital intensive, and they take lots of planning and lots of time to execute on. But I'd like to change the thinking there to offer the option of using data that is already existing in buildings to start making some significant inroads on that carbon reduction journey. And there are technologies available to make that easy, right? So it's going back to that urgency. It's going back to the fact that the planet can't wait, but the fact that there's a perfectly economically viable opportunity teed up right in front of us. So let's execute on it.
Perfect. So there we've got scale and speed. Bring your stakeholders with you and make it easy, because that makes this start faster. So great work, panel there. So we are bang on time. Last little concluding thought from me, bit of context. Are we currently on target to achieve net zero in global terms? According to the latest emissions gap report from the UN, no. Commitments by governments fall well short what's required. Just to give you a flavour, national climate plans for the 195 parties to the Paris Agreement, if you took them together, we'd actually have an increase of almost 9% in global greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 compared to 2010. Obviously, what we're looking for 1.5 degrees C or less is to decrease emissions, reduce them by 45% 2030, net zero by 2050. So we don't just have an emissions gap, we also have a credibility gap. But crucially today, the solutions and the strategies, they do exist. And I think we've heard champion the role of the built environment sector in actually making some of those national and global climate goals happen. So there's a lot to do, but it can be done, I think, is my final takeaway. So closing, big thank you to our esteemed panelists for expert insights, Robbie Epsom, Magdalena Gibney and Neil Coleman, plus of course, Paul Walsh and our host CIM.